Hello everyone, my name is Payton Spear and I am the admissions demonstrator here at the Culinary Institute. I first began my education at CIA in January of 2017 for my associates in baking and pastry arts. In that time, I did my externship at the Four Seasons in West Palm Beach, Florida. After graduating from my associates, I decided to come back for my bachelor's in business management, where I spent my final semester in Puglia, Italy for the Italian cuisine concentration. So I'm so excited to get to talk to you all today about all that CIA has to offer. So for our demo, we are actually going to be covering something that has become a new phenomenon in the time of fall, and that is pumpkin spice. Pumpkin spice is literally in every product imaginable this time of year, whether it's candles, craft beers, so anything like that, even in your Starbucks drinks. And what better way to demonstrate that than with pumpkin pie is its original form. So this is going to be a perfect demonstration as we get into the holidays, and you can figure out how to make your own homemade pie for your friends and family. So for our beginning, we're going to start by making our very own pumpkin pie, pie dough. And what I have here is just my regular AP flour, about 3 tablespoons of sugar, and a little bit of salt. I do this because I want to season my dish all the way through, so I'm going to do a pinch of salt here. And then I'm going to be adding in just a few more ingredients, but it's the way that these ingredients have been prepared and stored that is going to make the world of a difference for our product. So I'm going to start by doing some unsalted butter. And the thing about this unsalted butter that's a little bit different is that it's been frozen, because I do want these to maintain their shape as much as possible. I also have a little bit of shortening. Here we go. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my bench scraper and I'm going to put a little bit of flour over it. And I'm going to start incorporating and cutting this butter into smaller pieces and incorporating it into my flour. Eventually I will start using my hands, but I do want to get more of that cut for this butter. So I'm going to start with my bench scraper. And I'm really looking for my butter to be about pea-sized form. This is a small batch of pie dough, but if you want to make a larger batch and you don't have a lot of time, or if you're working in a production kitchen, you can do this in a food processor, but it's going to be the same process, the same addition of ingredients, and the same quantity as well. Perfect. And the reason that I use unsalted flour or unsalted butter is because I want to maintain as much control as possible when it comes to my product and how much salt has been added to it. So it's better to gauge that way when you have unsalted butter, and you can control how much you add in. I always recommend it. Alrighty, so as you can see, our butter is starting to cut now. It's getting these smaller pieces into it. I'm going to do a few more. If some are a little bit bigger than others, that's okay. Alright, so that's exactly what we're looking for, these small broken up pieces. Now I'm going to add in at most a half cup of, again, cold water, because I want my butter to maintain this temperature and stay solid. I say at most a half cup because I'm going to add in at about a quarter of the time, because I never know how much I need, if I need to add more or less. So I'm just going to gauge as I go. Start incorporating, making sure I'm getting all that loose flour put together. And like I said, I am going to use my hands at the end, but I want to get it as combined as I can into at least a loose dough beforehand so my hands don't stick to it too much. I don't see any too much water that's loose, so I'm going to add a little bit more water, but you can see it's starting to come together, and that's exactly what we're looking for. And so many people get intimidated by pie dough, but I mean, as you all can see, it's a really easy process. It's just knowing your ingredients and how to work with them. And Pie Day is one of my favorite parts of our fundamentals class. It was such a good time because we literally made all kinds of pies, from custards to fruit pies to these pie fillings like pumpkin pie. And we used the same exact pie dough for every single one of them. So this is perfect if you want to make any kind of pie. So our dough is starting to come together, so I'm going to start using my hands. I'm going to get that dry, loose flour. I'm gonna press it onto my dough as well as on my hands, because I don't want the dough to stick too much. And then I'm going to press down and start almost doing a folding motion, pressing into the loose flour, getting it to come together. There we go. And you can see these clumps of butter in our dough. That's exactly what we're looking for. So I'm going to work fast and try to keep it so that this dough still has those butter solids in it. Perfect. Nice, just a few more folds and then we'll be good to go. But you can see that this is really coming together now. Perfect. So now that my dough is well combined, this is the most that I'm going to do with mixing it, just because I know that it's also going to get a lot of mixing whenever I roll it out. So I'm just going to put a little bit of saran wrap over it, so that way it doesn't dry out. I'm going to keep it in the ball form, so that way when I roll it, it's going to maintain this shape. And now because we've developed gluten, I'm going to let it rest in the fridge for about 45 minutes. And since we don't have that long, we're actually going to use the power of TV and use this pie dough that I made fresh this morning. A key thing to do is to flour your station with your dough, because you don't want it to stick to the table. So giving a generous amount of flour is always important. I also keep a loose amount of flour when I'm making my dough, just in case it needs a little bit more if it seems like I've added too much water. So you can see these little butter fats. That's perfect, because once that goes into the oven, that butter is going to melt, and then we're going to get these beautiful layers in this flaky pie dough. I'm going to flour it on both sides, because there's a lot of moisture that's developed. And also we've got a little bit of rain outside, so that will definitely affect your dough. Alrighty. Now I'm going to take it. I'm going to use my rolling pin, and I'm going to just press gently from the center out. I don't want to go too much too fast, otherwise I'm going to get cracks in my dough. That's definitely something we want to avoid. Then I'm going to turn my dough over, get some of that loose flour, turn it. Perfect. There you go. And you can see all of that flakiness, that butter that's going to melt in the oven. That's perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. In terms of thinness, you want it to be at least about 1/4 of an inch. And you also want it to be very flexible, because you want it to adjust to the corners of your pan. And make sure that goes. I'm gently lifting. Again, I'm going to add some more flour. You'll definitely use quite a bit of flour when it comes to your pie dough, so don't worry and don't be afraid to use a lot of it. We want to work fast, because you can see that this butter is starting to warm up a little bit. Sadly, I have been cursed with warm hands, so I want to work as quick as possible. Perfect. I'm going to lift up. Perfect. And one of the reasons that I lift too is because this pie dough has a tendency to shrink after it's been stretched onto the table. So you want it to shrink beforehand before you cut it to match your pie tin. Otherwise you could have one that's too small. So now I'm going to take my pie tin. Perfect. We are just at the right size for it. So now I'm going to cut where there's enough excess. And you want to cut to where there's about 1 inch of excess left over. If there's too much on the sides, that's okay. We can go back and cut, but you want to make sure you have enough starting out. I'm going to keep this scrap pie dough for another part of our demo. Now I'm going to clean up my station just a second. Make sure that I have enough space. And then I'm going to gently take my pie dough. I'm going to lift it onto my pie tin. Now I'm going to lift the sides and press down so that the corners, because I don't want to stretch any more than I have, otherwise I'm going to have an uneven pie dough. So I'm going to lift and press down. Then I'm going to press it onto the corners just a bit so I have some layover. Now this pie dough is going to shrink whenever it goes into the oven. So a little trick that we use, you take another pie tin and you press it down gently. And because of the flakiness from the butter and the oils, it's going to keep it from sticking. And then you're going to take a heavy spoon on both sides. Make sure that it's metal so that way it doesn't melt or anything in your oven. Then I'm going to place it onto the tray for later. And now I'm going to show you how to make a what I call natural garnish. So that means that we're going to be using an additional garnish for our pie, but we're not going to be adding something that really doesn't complement the dish at all. This is really just going to be a natural ingredient that we already have in stock, and also I don't want to have my pie dough go to waste. So I actually figured out this method whenever I was in Pie Day at Fundamentals. And it wasn't something that a chef taught me, but it was at Pie Day our chef told us that we could be creative, we could decorate any way that we want to. And I was nervous about this, I didn't know if it was going to work, and I even almost quit at one point. And my chef instructor told me, she said, don't give up, like just try it, follow through. And I absolutely love doing this all the time now. Alrighty, so I'm really trying to get most of that butter incorporated because I don't really want this dough to be flaky as much. I want it to be pretty well structured. So I'm taking a lot of that excess flour, pretty much the rest of my flour actually. I'm going to press down. It's okay if it's a little bit dry. And then I'm going to roll it out now. Make sure that I press on both sides, have it well dusted with flour. And now I'm going to roll it out pretty thin compared. You can already see, like I said, I've got warm hands, so this butter is starting to melt a little bit. I'm going to use a lot of flour. Perfect. Now I'm going to peel off. Add a little bit more flour. Perfect. And now I'm going to take these 3 different size cutters that I have, and I'm going to cut 2 of each for my garnish. I don't want to press too hard. I want to make sure that these pie rolls are pretty thin. So if they're a little thick like this one, I'm going to press down with my fingers, have them be a little bit thinner. Get the smallest one here. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my circle, starting with the thinnest one. I'm going to press down, make it a little bit more free form, maybe a little bit more into an oval. And then I'm going to press one on top of the other, making sure that I combine the ends of the circles. I'm going to take my second largest circle, doing the same thing. And one more time. And then I'm going to take my largest ones, doing the same thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently roll. Want to make sure that it's well combined with all of the circles, so that way they stay together while they're baking. And then I'm just gonna take my dough cutter, cutting right down the middle, making sure that they stay well combined. Then I'm gonna pull out the petals. And there we have it, a nice little garnish made with our pie dough. So we don't let anything go to waste, and it really showcases the product that we're working with. And I push these to the sides, that way they have something to lean on when they bake, and the leaves stay, or the petals stay combined. I'm gonna wash my hands really quick before I put these in the oven. Now my oven temperature is about 375 degrees. And what I'm gonna be doing with this pie dough is it's going to be par baked. So I'm gonna bake it halfway through before putting my filling in. So that way, I don't know if any of you watch Great British Bake Off, but that way we don't have a soggy bottom, which is absolutely the death of pie. So no soggy bottoms here. I'm gonna have this baked for about 20 minutes. And now we're gonna move on to the next part of a pumpkin pie, which is our filling. It can seem really intimidating, but honestly, it's just about 4 ingredients. So we're gonna start with our pumpkin puree. Really quite easy. This is just like the ones that you guys get in a can, but I'm gonna whisk it a little bit to make sure that it's well combined. I don't have any clumps. And then next, I'm going to add in 2 eggs. Eggs are gonna serve as our stabilizer. So that way it really stays together whenever you're cutting. Because whenever you put in the oven, it's gonna be really loose and you might be nervous that it's just too loose and it won't stay together. But don't worry, those eggs are gonna serve a great purpose when it comes to it. So I'm making sure that you're well combined. And we want this to be a loose consistency. So we're gonna make sure everything is well incorporated. And if you're worried about air bubbles, that's okay because you can just tap the pie, like we'll do later, and you'll get rid of any air bubbles that you might have. Then the next big ingredient that we're gonna add is going to be our sweetened condensed milk. Sweetened condensed milk is the reason that a lot of times pumpkin pies don't have this grainy taste to them, because if you replace it with normal sugar, you're gonna have this graininess to your pumpkin pie, but because they're the same consistency as pumpkin puree and sweet condensed milk, you're gonna have a smoother pumpkin pie. I'm gonna make sure that I scrape as much of the bowl as possible, because oftentimes in the kitchens here, chefs will ask to see that your bowls and make sure that you take as much of the product as possible, because it means that you're gonna have a greater recipe, because you wanna get the exact measurements as much as you can. As you can see, we're starting to get more to that traditional color and consistency that you see whenever you're working with your pumpkin pies. Scraping all sides of the bowl. Lastly, I'm gonna add in some cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. And it's so wild that really like these 4 major ingredients just created such a phenomenon of food. Like I said, it's literally in everything nowadays. And I'm gonna add a little bit of salt so we can season as we go. Perfect. I can check, we don't have any clumps. Everything looks well combined, which is perfect. Now, in terms of the par bake for your pumpkin pie, we're again gonna use the power of TV. And it's pretty much browned around the edges. There's a little bit of underbake in the pie shell, but that's what we want because while it's going to continue to cook with the filling, it's gonna finish cooking in the oven. So, I'm gonna take my pie, and then I'm going to take my filling and I'm gonna slowly add it in from the center and let it fill from the center. And I may use all my filling, I may not, it just depends on the pie shell. But you know whenever you're done, when there's enough for the ridges to be even around and it doesn't overflow. wipe the side so we don't have any spillage. And then I'm just going to lightly tap my pie. That's to get rid of all the ridges, but it'll happen when it bakes, they'll just bake out. And then also any air bubbles. So I'm gonna put this in the oven, and it'll go for about 40 minutes or so, but you're gonna know when it's done whenever you touch the top of your pie filling, and there's a little bit of what's called bounce back. So you don't feel it go in whenever you're pushing with your finger, it's just slightly bouncing. And here we have a pumpkin pie that is ready to go for our garnishes. And you might even see that I've got this little crack right here, but as I say, it's not broken unless you can't fix it. So we're gonna cover that up with some whipped cream as well as our made roses. So to get started, I'm just gonna use the 806 tip, which is a round tip. And I wanna make almost like a wreath with my roses. So just going back and forth, back and forth. And if you feel like you're intimidated a little bit by piping, please don't be. Honestly, baking and pastry students do this as part of their homework, and also culinary students will do this whenever they take a baking for culinary arts class. So everyone's gonna learn, just like baking students are gonna learn how to do some knife cuts. And you never really know how you're gonna garnish your pie until you're there, so it's really fun. It's a little bit artistic side. I always say that culinary students get to be artistic whenever they're in the cooking process, and baking and pastry students get to be creative in the beginning when they come up with their flavor components, and then whenever they're garnishing. So, this little here. I'm gonna use this to give a little height for my roses. Perfect. Now with my roses, I'm gonna add where I feel like it needs a little extra push. Perfect. And you can make this pie dough cut into leaves, roses, any types of flowers that you like. Sometimes people will then braid it, and they'll do that. So it's really fun. You just get to be creative with it. One more to the side. And then finally, I'm gonna take some of that cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. I'm just gonna sprinkle it gently, give some color. And then there you have it, a beautiful garnish to a seasonal dish. Enjoy.